The following is a presentation of the Maine Department of Education School Finance Team, brought to you by the Maine School Management Association.
I'm going to get you moving here. All right, so we're going to take a few minutes to talk about some exciting changes to the Essential Programs and Services funding formula. First thing I want to remind you of that you might have heard a couple times today, the importance of data. Accurate, correct, and timely. Let's act on data. Accurate, correct, and timely. It is so important in everything that we do for you. And together, we are partners in trying to ensure that SAUs, that the students in the state of Maine receive the education that they deserve and that allows them to have the opportunity to achieve Maine's learning results. But the only way that we can do that is if we work with you and you work with us to ensure that the data that you are giving to us to use in all of the formulas that we put together per statute are done accurately and timely. So I'm begging you, if something opens, a report, please don't wait till the last minute to get us what we need. That deadline is there, yes, but the deadline is because we have work to do with the data. So if you can do it earlier, please do. In fact, the EFSO 7 is open. So if you're able, go in and fill it out so it's done. Your quarter 4 expenditures for FY26, they're due to us by August 30. If you haven't had them audited, that's okay. We don't want to wait until they're audited. In fact, we can't, because we have got deadlines to get all of our calculations for FY28 funding done as early as possible, because the state budget office, the Bureau of the Budget, needs to know how much we need towards funding education, because they've got the whole state budget that they need to put together as quickly as possible so that the governor and the legislators can decide how much money we need for the upcoming year and the biennial, actually, this coming year. So it all works together. But we want to do what's best for you. We want to ensure you're going to get everything that you deserve. So this is my plea to work with us, and if you have a question about something, give us a call, and we will do our best to help you. The legislative updates I'm about to give you mainly are going to be about LD 2226, which are changes to the EPS funding formula. Again, everything we do is in statute. The purpose of education is in the Constitution, and then how we do everything is in Title 20A. Portland Press Herald said that these changes that are being enacted, that have been signed into law and are enacted this year that will affect FY28 funding, were long overdue. And I would have to say, given my experience, that is true. Now, the EPS formula isn't perfect, but I think it does a fairly decent job of providing a decent amount of funding and splitting a limited amount of state resources equitably so that those that may need more in higher poverty towns get more of state funding, and those that may need less, because they can provide more at the local level, get less of the limited state funding. But it's going to get better, because some things needed to be changed and updated. The biggest one that we're going to talk about is the regional index adjustment. On section 1 that Donna just went through and very eloquently explained, that regional adjustment is in there, that index that we use is in there to adjust either up or down, because we use an average salary matrix for all of the salaries that we allocate funding for. Because we know in Maine, there are some areas of the state that those salaries are going to be higher and the cost of living is higher, or the salaries are going to be lower where the cost of living is lower. We use that average salary, so we need to adjust either up or down. You're going to need either more funding or less funding. So the problem with that is that regional index that we're using is the same index that was put into place in 2005, 20 years ago. I'm pretty sure that the economic conditions in your towns have changed in the last 20 years. I know mine has. My own house has. So it's been flat. It hasn't changed. It's finally going to change. The next thing we're going to talk about is adding a poverty metric into the mill rate for every SAU and the ability to contribute towards education. So instead of using just your property values, which it's still going to be property value based, there's also going to be a poverty indicator that's now added in, and instead of everybody having the same mill rate, which is the cap, the most that any town will be asked to contribute towards education in your SAU, now there's going to be variable mill rates. If you have higher poverty, then your mill rate's going to go down, which means your local contribution will be less. If you have lower poverty, your mill rate is going to go up because you can contribute a little bit more based on lower poverty. We'll talk about that. And then finally, the third thing that they put in, because of the fact that some towns with lower poverty will see an increase in their mill rate and in their local contribution, the legislature put in a transition period to give them time to adjust and to prepare of 5 years before that is fully implemented for them. So I'm going to explain all those things. The first and most important thing is this does not happen for the current FY27 school year that just started. I keep getting calls from senators and legislators saying, hey, how much more is my town going to get this year due to LD 22.6 and the changes to EPS funding? And I can easily and quickly say none, because it does not impact FY27 funding. We had to ask that it wait for FY28. And I hope you agree with me when I say we did this on purpose, because by the time the legislature signed this bill into law and it becomes enacted, which technically isn't till next week, July 29th, because it has 90 days after signature or after sign die, or I don't know, there's a lot of terms in the legislature I don't truly understand, but what I know is it doesn't take effect until 90 days after. And so have you all gotten your budget together? Yeah. So we wouldn't be able to change it in time for you to put through. You'd have to go back to the drawing table. You'd have to go back to your people, and you'd have to do it all over again. Do you want to do it again? No, I didn't think so. So anytime legislation like this is being recommended, we know that it doesn't make sense to enact it in the current or upcoming fiscal year, because you all need this information, and that's why we're asked to get the 279s ready before February 1st, because you're putting your budgets together then. March, you have meetings. By May, you're voted, hopefully, or June. I'm not really sure exactly, but I know that you're doing it already, because July 1st is the first year of the fiscal year, of the new school year. So it doesn't happen yet, but it will happen. And it happens for what we're going to calculate in just a few short months, and using the data that we're collecting now. So the EFS 07 is open. That data is going to be used. The October counts, that data is going to be used. Very important. Staff data and all of your financial data. Your financial data, by the way, is due August 30. So please get us your Q4 financials. If after your audit you have a change, reach out to us and we will allow you to update your Q4s again with that change. But for now, get us your ready as possible, FY26, last quarter, expenditure, revenue, et cetera, all that data, so that we'll be ready to calculate the funding as soon as we get all these other components into hand, okay? I have highlighted the economically disadvantaged student line, because the poverty metric that is going to be added into the formula that will provide a system for either having the mill rate go up or down is the same economic disadvantage percentage on Section 2 of your ED 279, which is collected through 3 options. The first option is direct certification. Direct certification is given to us from DHHS. They send us a list of students, and by us I mean the Department of Education, to the Student Information System. The data team collects it. Those are students that are automatically considered economically disadvantaged because they are eligible for TANF or SNAP, or they're Maine Care eligible. They're eligible for Maine Care. They are automatically considered economically disadvantaged every year. Now, this data has to be collected annually. Every year we need to know, student level, how many economically disadvantaged students do you have? The definition in the formula for EPS, Chapter 606B of Title 20A, of an economically disadvantaged student is those students that are eligible for free and reduced lunch based on the federal guidelines every year. That definition was put in place a lot of years ago. I'll give you a quick background. Because at the time, pretty much most people back in the early 2000s applied for free and reduced lunch through the nutrition program. And so rather than have an additional type of collection of data, the makers of EPS said, we'll just use the same data collection that's already happening. And free and reduced lunch, people were applying, and that was what was used. Well, as time has gone on, things have changed significantly since COVID, and now everybody gets free lunch. So there are very few that are even applying for free and reduced lunch anymore. And by the way, EPS doesn't feed kids. We don't provide nutrition. That's all on the federal side or the state side through the nutrition program. But we were using the same data source because it was hopefully easier at the time. So things have changed, but the definition is still the same. So a number of years ago, 6 or 7, when CEP schools came into play, community eligible provision, we said, okay, we still need this data annually, and we need to know who in every school is considered economically disadvantaged, even if that whole school is considered free for lunch purposes. So we created what is known as the Alternate Economic Disadvantage Status Form. And that is the form that we're going to talk about a lot, that you're going to need to really ramp up the collection of. So I was in the middle of telling you the 3 components that make up an economically disadvantaged student. First is that direct cert list. Second is still, if you're collecting free and reduced lunch forms for nutrition purposes, that is another factor that will be used. And the third one is the alternate economic disadvantage status form that is only to be used for essential programs and services state funding. It cannot be used for federal funding of any sort. It is only for purposes of EPS funding, but it is for purposes of funding. It cannot be used for nutrition. It cannot be used for free lunch or free milk or any of those other programs, only for funding. But that's the key that I would like for you to take away from this today. Please get this out to your families and say, look, this impacts our taxes. This impacts our state funding for education. Please fill it out. We have made the form as simple as possible. At the end of your docket or packet, at the end of the slides are some QR codes. One of them is going to go to a other materials place on our website. And one of the documents that we've given you there is the template for you to use for this year's alternate economic disadvantage collection. It's a template, but you do have to use the guidelines from the feds. It's very simple. And you can do it many ways. You can create an online form. You can create a website. You can go to a soccer game and sit out in front and say, hey, could you fill this out? It's that simple, though. It really is simple. They don't need any backup documentation. It's one page. You can use one form for a whole household unless they have more than 8 kids. If they have more than 8 kids, they are absolutely eligible, I would say. I'm guessing. And we would just need a second form because we only have lines enough for 8 kids. That's all. But it's literally, where do you fall in the number of people in your household, here's the area that you would be considered free or reduced. Are you in that? Check yes or check no. That's simple, and a signature. Now, I do need you all to collect it, and you're responsible. Don't send it to me. It will end up in the circular file, and it will not get recorded for you. You keep it for 7 years, just in case we audit you. We may do a check to make sure that you are collecting and reporting accurately, because again, we are accountable for and responsible for the tax dollars associated with these collections. You are responsible and accountable for the tax dollars that are part of these collections. The collection is done, the data is entered into your student information system and uploaded to the state information system. If you are using the alternate form, it actually says they are eligible for free and reduced as a result of this alternate form, or something like that. I'm not on the data team, but you all probably are familiar with the MEDM support team and their number. They're the ones that can help you better than me. In fact, Allie Cookson is doing training right now around the state about all of this collection, and she is the expert on collection and entering the data into the system. We are working also to put together some best practices that we have heard from around the state of how to have 100% collection of these forms, which would be wonderful, wouldn't it? If you could get everybody to contribute. Now, I understand that it's hard. He had to leave for a minute, but forgot it. Excuse me? Chad, thank you. Chad is the new superintendent in Richmond. And he was talking, he's like, it's really hard to get them to collect. Is there another way? Is there a better way of determining economic disadvantage status? I wish there were. And over the past years, MEPRI has checked. And just recently, the reports that they've put out that are available that also came to fruition in LD 2226 showed that of all of the resources out there to determine poverty status, this is still the best indicator that we have in Maine. Census data is great as far as, you know, median income and things like that you might think might be better to use instead of student status economic disadvantaged, but it's not available at the little town level in Maine, because most towns in Maine are smaller than what census reports on. That's just the truth of it. So we can't get what we need. We need town level data. And we did go to MRS. We went to Maine Revenue Services. Over the last few years, we've gone through the governor's office, we've gone through commissioners, we've gone through legislators, and we are always told we are not ever going to get access to individual tax forms, individual information, even if we just asked for aggregate by town income level. We cannot have it. It just won't happen. I promise you we've tried. We would love to see something better than having to ask you to collect this information. It just does not exist right now. So what I'm asking for you to do is to be diligent, to do your best, because this is not only important, as Donna explained, in the overall funding formula for EPS, now it's going to impact your ability to contribute and your mill rate, because that's what we're using for the poverty metric, starting with FY28 funding. Everybody okay with that? As best you can be? I'm sometimes the messenger of good news and sometimes the messenger of bad news. All right, really quickly, as best I can. The regional index. Donna already explained to you how it works. I'm going to now kind of just go over again why it needs help, why it needs fixing. So, it adjusts the statewide average salary data to account for regional differences in compensation. You all get that, right? We use an average salary, unless you all want us to do a statewide teacher contract. Thank you for laughing. That was meant to be a joke. We can't know. And yeah, you give us your salary levels, that we could never do a formula that looked at all of them. It makes sense to use an average salary. Well, it did make sense. It actually doesn't anymore. And that's one of the problems. The salary index also was wrong. That's going to be fixed now too. So, This is what the 35 labor market areas that the regional index that was created in 2005 and has been used since then looked like back then, 20 years ago, and it has not been updated. There were 35 labor market areas. If you go to the Department of Labor and look up labor market areas in Maine, there aren't 35 anymore. So there aren't even 35 that exist anymore, let alone are they set up in this way. Back then, Rockland apparently was the average in the state of Maine for teacher salaries. Do you think that makes sense anymore? I don't think it does either. So the way it works is, 1 is the average. Anybody who has a cost of living or teacher salaries that are below 1 would have a number below 1, and we would decrease the funding allocation by that amount. If you're above 1, so you pay more than Rockland did at the time, we would give you a little more. The problem is, these have never been updated, and I know that the economic situations have changed, and so it really needed to be updated. Now, every 3 years, MEPRI reviews every component, including this one, of the formula, comes back with recommendations for possible changes. But as Donna mentioned earlier, any changes have to go through a legislative process. And so the change to this particular formula never got approved in legislation. So it just hasn't happened. I am so thankful and grateful that we are finally going to fix this particular issue that needed to be updated and changed. The other problem, not only is it outdated index and the economy has changed, but we went from average salaries in the state to minimum salaries. In 2007 was the first year that a $30,000 teacher minimum salary was enacted by the legislature. Since then, we have a $40,000 minimum salary that was enacted in FY23. Now, spoiler alert, here's another new change that's coming starting in FY28. We're going to be ramping up to $50,000 minimum salary. That was also enacted in the recent legislation. In FY28, it's going to be $45,000. In FY29, $47,500. And then in FY30 and beyond, it's going to be $50,000. So we were using a salary matrix based on average salaries, but you were paying a minimum salary, and then we were taking, even though we changed that minimum salary to be the minimum, we were still allocating below that because the regional indices for some were below 1. So even though you had to pay the minimum, the allocation in the funding formula was reducing that. And so it wasn't fully funding the requirement in statute for the minimum salaries, which meant that what you were paying was all on the local side. If it's left out of the EPS allocation and calculation, there is no state share, and it's all local share. So the good news is that's also being corrected in this new legislation. So the proposed change, and I don't know why I'm saying proposed, I'm going to have to change that. It's now actually enacted. The impact of this enacted change that will take place this coming fall is that we are now using a cost of living model instead of an average salary based on teacher salary model, okay? And it's going to be based on Maine's 16 counties instead of 35 labor market areas. The data will be collected using national and state indices through MEPRI, and hopefully it will be updated on a much regular basis. The other really important factor is that it will have a floor of 1, which is really important since the salary levels are now minimum. So the salary matrix will be updated. It will take into account that it's minimum salaries instead of average salaries, and nobody will ever go below that minimum level. So everybody starts at 1 and only goes up instead of down. That's so important. That's the most important factor, of this entire formula. So it's hopefully going to reflect the current cost of living better. It will more accurately and fairly reflect actual salaries around the state, and it's a truer cost of operating schools. So this fix, hopefully now, what was being paid out of local funds can be now part of the formula with a state and local share. So that's the hope. Well, it should happen. I can't imagine why it wouldn't. This is a picture of what if we had done just the updated indices using cost of living for 16 counties, but didn't do the one floor. So we allowed it to go down. You see that basically the green, the regular green, is 1. That's the base. Anybody that goes below green, lighter green to yellow, would be getting lower than the base for their salaries. Anybody above, up to blue, would get higher. As you can see over here, there is no blue. Over here, however, nobody, Washington County, Aroostook County, Oxford, none of them are going to go below that base green. Some of them go a little higher. And of course, the areas, Cumberland, York, those pay higher salaries. Their cost of living is much higher. And so those will go above. Any questions about the regional index updates? Anybody not think they're a good idea? Yeah, okay. I am very excited about that. This is just a summary of the changes to the regional index. Now we're going to get into the poverty metric. So it's always about the pie. This is the whole pie. In FY28, FY27, the total cost of education as calculated per the EPS formula came out to be $2.8 billion. That's all our tax money, by the way. Whether it's state funded or local funded, we're all taxpayers here, right? So we need to work together to try to make sure that this funding is used as appropriately as it can be and that it's distributed the way it should be. So $2.8 billion, the state share is 55% at this time. And so it's 55% of the total cost of education. So the pecan pie is the state share, 55%. It is never intended to be 55% of your school administrative unit's cost of education. That would be an interesting cost, though. I'll have to calculate that sometime to see what that would be. That would be a lot of money, just saying. But right now, it's 55% of the total cost. The cherry pie, it should be apple pie in Maine, right? But, so the cherry part is the 45%. That 45%, which is $1.3 billion, so the state's contributing $1.6 billion of the 2.8, and then the locals all across the state, totally, we need to collect from the locals towards education. They keep it, by the way. We don't take it. It's part of their calculated funding at the SAU. Their share is going to be the $1.3 billion. So how do we say how much of that $1.3 billion each town is responsible for contributing towards education in their school administrative unit? That's where it comes in to determine what the mill rate is, which again is the cap, the most any town will be asked to contribute towards education in their SAU locally. So we say, okay, if we know we need $1.3 billion, we then take all of the town valuations, all 450 some towns in 266 school administrative units, and we say, if we divide the total cost needed, local share needed, 1.3, by the total valuations, what is that number? That's an approximate that's the approximate mill rate, okay? That's how we calculate the mill rate. It's actually simple math, like Donna was saying. All of this is simple math. So once we've determined the mill rate, 5.6545 in FY27, then we can go in and say, okay, here's your valuation times the mill rate divided by 1,000. Here's the amount that your town can contribute towards education in your SAU. Now, if you are a minimum contributor, it means that you can, the calculation of the mill rate times your valuation is actually higher than what your total cost of education is. So we're not going to ask you to contribute that higher amount, because that would be silly, but you can already cover the whole cost. So you don't need state share to help you with the education. So you're actually contributing a lower mill rate in a minimum contributor SAU. But the state will give them something because there's a minimum contributor adjustment that Donna explained. So here's what is currently happening and how we determine the mill rate. I just explained it to you and Donna showed it earlier, but I kind of listed it out completely. First, we have to know the total cost, which is why all of your data coming in when we need it, we can't give one SAU an extension because without theirs, we can't calculate it for anybody. So it's like when you're in school and you're having a test and the teacher warns you, if one person makes a sound, you're all staying in for recess, so you're all punished. Well, if one person is late with their data, you're all punished. We can't get the calculations done, and we're punished too. It's the same idea. So anyway, this is how we're doing it now. We haven't added a poverty metric yet. So everybody's like, well, if we're using property value, I get that, but what about the poor people? What about those that are really having a difficult time paying their property taxes, which are keep increasing? What about my grandmother who is on fixed income, Social Security? She lives in her house that she's had for centuries, well, in her family for a century, and her property taxes keep going up and she can't afford to pay it. What about her? Can't you do something in the school funding formula to help her? I wish we could. I can't help her because the school funding formula looks at the whole town. And so I'm going to tell you what I've told everybody that will listen to me at the state. The best way to help your grandmother in that situation is with tax reform and some kind of tax rebate, similar to the homestead exemption. So we can't fix that problem in the formula for the individual person, but maybe taxes can. I don't know what that is. I'm not a tax expert, but I know we can't do it here, and 16 years of experience has told me there's no way to do it here. But we can help an overall town that has a higher percentage of poverty based on economic disadvantaged students. We can help them. We can help the whole town in that way, which will help that individual some, probably not enough yet, however. But this is going to do a little bit to help towards that for those higher poverty areas. So this is the current method, as I mentioned. This is an example of a town that has valuation of $2.58 billion. Multiply that times the current mill rate of 5.645, and their local contribution is going to be $14.5 million, okay? Now I'm going to show you the new method. The new method, we're still using town valuation, but we're going to introduce a 10% poverty weight into the mill rate. This hopefully will better reflect the local economic capacity to contribute towards education. Again, we're using the percentage of economic disadvantaged students residing within the SAU, same percentage used on Section 2 of your ED 279 report. The result of this will be that a higher poverty SAU will benefit from a reduced mill rate, and a lower poverty SAU will be assigned a higher mill rate to balance the educational funding. We still have the same amount of local that we need to collect. So we are redistributing the amounts by saying if you have higher poverty, you don't have to put in as much, but you have lower poverty, we're going to ask you to contribute a bit more. So it's a redistribution. I've then added a couple of, 3 new lines here as to how the calculation is going to be done. We're using something that we're calling an affluence index. It's 1 minus the SAU economic disadvantage percentage divided by 1 minus the weighted average state economic disadvantage percentage. So a couple new things we need to calculate in the upcoming year. Then we're going to take that affluence index and multiply it times 0.10. So this is only using 10% of the poverty metric in determining whether how much the property value goes up or down. The mill rate will go up or down, not the property value. The mill rate goes up or down. It could have been a different weight, but in the end, the legislature decided to start with 10, see how it goes, and then maybe consider a higher weight. So just something for you to keep in the back of your head. So here is a little chart showing exactly how the calculation is done. This one is showing an example. So what I did here is I brought in the one from the other page where it's using the current FY27 mill rate, 5.645. So I'm using the same town, same value, but I'm going to use a different poverty metric to show you the result. In the first one, the top one, this town is going to have a 64.32% economic disadvantage percentage, so they're higher poverty. When you multiply it through all of the new calculations that we're using for the affluence index, and then applying it at 10%, it's going to reduce this mill rate from 5.645 to 5.465. So their required contribution is now $14.1 billion instead of 14.5, saving them about $400,000 in required local share. If we then say that that town actually only has 38.2% poverty or economically disadvantaged, go through the formula, it then increases the mill rate from 5.645 to 5.746, asking them instead to contribute 14.8 billion, excuse me, sorry, the B's and the M's get mixed up, million towards their education, which is really only about, what, 300,000 more. So as you can see, the fluctuation with a 10% factor isn't terribly significant, but it's helpful, okay? Any questions about how that's going to be done? Getting you into the weeds that we have to do for every single one of you. So that's the poverty metric. Now the transition period. To allow for those that have lower poverty to have a little time to adjust, they put in a transition period of 5 years. For the first 3 years, FY28 through 2030, an SAU that is impacted with a lower state share at the end of all the calculations as a result of just these two changes, no other changes. If they are having enrollment declines and other things that are changing, that would have changed their state share without these changes, then they're still going to have less state share for that. But the part of that the formula that that these state changes impact, if that results in less state share, for the first 3 years, we're going to keep them the same as the prior year's state share. I have to think about this, so I'm closing my eyes. We have to keep them at the same state share that they were at the prior year for the first 3 years at 100%. For the fourth year, it'll be at 75%, and then for the fifth year, 50%, and then after that, it will be whatever the calculation is. That's how the transition period is going to work for SAUs that have lower poverty and end up with a higher mill rate, and that it's this change that affects their state share. Everybody good with that? Those are the three things that were put into the legislation. This is kind of a visual of how that transition will work. This is a visual summary, key changes to the new formula. And then the last thing, I'm going to take a few minutes and go over some other key changes to legislation that impact the EPS funding formula. The first one is the cell phone ban. So by August 1st, a school board shall adopt and implement a policy prohibiting student use of personal electronic devices for the duration of the school day, from starting bell to dismissal bell. And there are funds being provided to assist with this that will be distributed to all SAUs that operate grades 6 through 12 in early August. So we will be sending out those funds in early August because technically the money's not available till July 29th. So early August, we'll be sending those funds to SAUs that operate schools 6 to 12, grades 6 to 12, to assist in however you and your school boards have decided to implement this new law, okay? What you do with it, I don't know, but that's up to you. And then the second one is and this was brought up a little while ago as far as the age of eligibility for funding. A few years ago, the age of eligibility for funding went up to age 22 for special ed, but it was not increased for a subsidy count or an attending count in the EPS formula. This increases it up to 22 for also a subsidy count in EPS. So you'll get EPS and special ed allocation, subsidy and special ed allocation if you have a student that is still in school up to age 22, okay? National Board Salary Supplement. For those of you that have National Board Certified teachers and you are in an SAU that has at least 50% economically disadvantaged, how it says? 50% of students are identified as economically disadvantaged for subsidy purposes. In prior years, the statute actually said you had to use the nutrition percentage, which is different from the EPS percentage. Sometimes the EPS percentage is higher because of the fact that we use that alternate collection. This includes that now a economically disadvantaged school will be now based on one of those, either of those. And so teachers that are in one of those designation schools will be able to get $5,000 for their national teacher certification, national board teacher certification, instead of the $3,000 that everybody else would get, okay? And then, as I already mentioned, the minimum teacher salary is increasing to $50,000 over a 3-year period. Adjustment, and so just as in when they did the increase to $40,000, there was a 3-year period of an adjustment where the difference between what you're paying now to those teachers and the new minimum, the state will provide you the difference for that first year. And then the second year, it'll be the difference from the first, if you're still below the minimum, okay? The second year, it'll be from 45 to 47.5, so it'll be either 2,500 or less, depending on where your teacher falls. And then the same for the third year. There will be an allocation of funding for any teacher that is still below whatever the new minimum is. We do use the salaries from the prior year. So for instance, for the FY28 funding, which is supposed to be at $45,000, we're going to take the FY27 data that you're giving us now for staff. Do you think data is important? I don't know. I've heard something about it. And then the next two are things that we are actually put into the recommended funding level. So they actually already changed for the FY27 funding in EPS, but they are actually enacted now. And that is moving the principal and interest payments of state-approved school construction projects from Section 3 of the EPS formula to Section 5B, so that it will not have an impact on the local share at all, which is really good, because the amount that is put into the EPS is only the state share. You may have a local required for that construction project, but that is not put into the 279 report or calculation of EPS. So that's a good change. And then the last one is we took out the adult education. So on Section 2, there was account collection for adult ed students that are 16 to 20-year-olds that had dropped out of school but were taking adult ed classes somewhere to get their high set or GED or whatever that high school equivalency is now. The problem with that is it was based on resident students and it went to resident SAUs, whether they actually provided adult ed or not. It involved an extra collection twice a year on the EFM 39A and B for you, resident SAU, to find out where these 16 to 20-year-olds are possibly taking adult ed classes. It was a very difficult collection for everybody, for you and for us. And then the money, which amounted to about a little over $5 million total for the entire state, was then sent through the formula and had a local and a state share. And in some cases, it would get to the adult ed programs that were actually providing the service to these students. And others it didn't. We had no way of knowing. So we talked about this a lot with adult ed, who actually needed more money for that particular demographic at the adult ed programs, and we said, well, why don't we just take it out of here, and we'll give it directly, instead of going through all of these middlemen and causing a local share and causing another collection, and just give this money each year to the adult ed team, and they can give it to the adult ed programs that are actually providing the service to 16 to 20-year-olds that have dropped out. So that's what we're doing. I hope you're okay with that. You no longer have to submit an EFM 39 A or B. That's a great thing. So we just really felt like that was the best use of those funds. And that's the last one, and that's it. That's the legislative update.
Any questions you have that aren't covered in this video? Go to maine.gov/DOE/funding and click on Contact Us. There you'll find the contacts for the school finance team. Expect a response within 24 to 48 hours. Click on another video within the playlist to continue watching the training.